Mise en scène Part 1. Review this lecture after reading Chapter 2, Mise en scène and Understanding Movies. Review the grammar sheet in the Week 4 module to aid in the note-taking process. Journal Question 3. Why is it important to watch films made outside of the U.S.? Consider the experience of watching Rabbit Proof Fence and what you learned. What do films made outside of Hollywood and in different countries show us? Mise en scène, Part 1. Mise en scène defined: the arrangement of the materials and subjects in front of the camera, placing on the stage, or putting into the scene in French. Building on visual subtext, mise en scène is controlled by the film's director. It shapes the elements of style. It serves to shape the narrative and shows the audience what they need to see or hear to understand the scene. Elements of mise en scène include set design, costumes, blocking of the actors, performance, lighting, and photographic composition. Bernard F. Dick says, each shot choice a director makes results in mise en scène that creates a unique effect. The frame is the building block of mise en scène. Directors compose the image to fit the frame, and the composition is restricted by the aspect ratio of the film. Aspect ratio, the height and width of the image. Last lecture we learned about different formats of film. Each film format comes with a distinct size or aspect ratio. Aspect ratio examples. You'll see here we have standard format, 4:3 and 3:2, and then widescreen format examples as well. We talked about depth of field when we looked at the wide-angle and telephoto compositions. Let's begin by breaking up the frame in depth, and the frame is divided into these three planes: the foreground, middle ground, and background. Depth of field definition: the distance from the near to the farthest that objects are in focus. Criteria: the next slide contains two identical images with different depth of field. Let's spend some time comparing and contrasting the images. A simple shift in depth of field from deep to shallow can change the information that's communicated to the viewer. How does the visual information change from the deep to shallow depth of field? Adjusting the depth of field changes the information that's communicated. This still from Citizen Kane has a deep depth of field. The image contains objects that are in focus in all three planes: the foreground, midground, and background. The shallow depth of field example from Nightmare on Elm Street, this composition only has one plane with objects in focus, the foreground. The eye rests on the important object in the foreground. Foreground, where important subjects or objects are often placed. Middle ground, where actors are often placed. Background, establishes a location, communicates information about a character, and sometimes the background is a character. In this case, the background is much larger than the human subject. By placing the character in the final third of the frame, our eyes rest on her last. Exploiting the frame. Areas of the frame can be exploited for symbolic meaning. Let's look at how placements of subjects and objects within the frame can change the visual subtext. Center of the frame, reserved for important visual elements. Central framing is very common. By placing subjects or objects in the center of the frame, a comfortable place or response is created. exploiting the top of the frame, creates a sense of power, authority, and control. Exploiting the bottom of the frame creates a sense of vulnerability and powerlessness. Placing subjects on the edge of the frame can create a sense of tension. The darkness can suggest fearfulness or the unknown. Composition and design. The eye can detect 7 or 8 major elements of composition simultaneously. The mise en scène guides the eye through the composition. The dominant is the area that immediately attracts our attention. Here's the criteria for our analysis of the dominant. To determine who or what is the dominant, consider where your eye goes first and why. Consider the depth of field. Who or what is in focus in the foreground, middle ground, and background? Are the top, bottom, center, or edges of the frame being exploited? And does the lighting draw the eye to a certain area of the frame? What is the dominant in this composition? Where does your eye go first? The man is the dominant because he's in the foreground, he's in focus, in the center of the frame, he's occupying the top of the frame, and he's lit in a way that attracts the eye. Composition and design continued. After taking in the dominant, the eyes move to the subsidiary contrast. Typically, there's a first subsidiary and then a second. To determine who or what is the subsidiary, consider where your eye goes after taking in the dominant. Consider the depth of field, the areas of the frame, and does the lighting draw the eye to a certain area of the frame? What are the subsidiary contrasts? Where does the eye go first after taking in the dominant? And then what is the second subsidiary? The woman is the first subsidiary because she's in the middle ground, in focus, on the edge in the first third of the frame, and lit in a way that draws the eye. After taking in the dominant in the first subsidiary, our eye moves to the second subsidiary in the background. The area is out of focus, not well lit. It communicates a minimal amount of information. Design lines are an important part of mise en scène and the organization of the two-dimensional space. Objects and subjects are arranged to create lines that draw the eye to certain areas of the frame. Vertical design lines. The vertical design lines created by the hallway pulls the eye up into the frame. Horizontal design lines. The horizontal design lines created by the man's head and the objects in the aquarium creates the effect that the subject is submerged. Diagonal design lines. A diagonal line is created by the woman in the foreground and the man in the middle ground. It draws the eye into the frame. Balance or instability is established through the number of subjects and objects in the composition. Even numbers can create a stable and balanced composition. Notice the symmetry created by having one side of the composition mirror the other. Odd numbers can create instability or appear off balance. The placement of the woman in the foreground and the two subjects in the background creates a triangle. The eye moves through the objects and subjects in the frame. Territorial space is how the subjects are arranged in relation to the camera. There are 5 positions. each one sends a different message. The full frontal position has the subject facing the camera head-on. This position is the most intimate. It's used sparingly, but for maximum effect. Another example of full frontal has the subject addressing the camera. He's still facing the camera head-on. The direct address breaks the fourth wall. The character talks to the camera. It brings the viewer into the film. A quarter turn is a favored position with a high degree of intimacy. While not as intimate as the full frontal, the viewer can still read the subject's entire face. Profile. The character faces away from the camera left or right. The sense of intimacy is cut off because the viewer can't see the subject's entire face. Look at the subjects in the second profile example. Since both are in profile, there's a sense of mystery or inaccessibility established. Three-quarter turn. The subject is turning away from the camera. It's more extreme than the profile shot. It's more anonymous and antisocial than the shots we've seen so far. Back to the camera. Having the subject's face away from the camera creates a sense of alienation and mystery. The viewer is not able to see the subject's faces at all. It establishes the least amount of intimacy. Proxemic patterns. The relationships of organisms within a given space. The distance between the subject and the camera. A camera proxemic shows the distance between the subject and the camera. We'll be looking at proxemic relationships inside the world of film and then the effect that they have on us, the viewers. An intimate proxemic pattern is anywhere from skin contact to 18 inches. The closer people are to each other, the greater the sense of intimacy. Would you feel comfortable sitting this close to someone you didn't know? Of course not. An intimate camera proxemic. The distance between the subject and the camera is a close-up or an extreme close-up. This puts the viewer at an intimate distance from the subject. Unlike the last picture, this one is too close for comfort. The intimate camera proxemic can be exploited to create an invasion of personal space. Unlike the previous slide, Freddie is too close for comfort. Did you know that proxemic patterns exist in all cultures? We tend to move closer to people we love or like. With strangers, when they stand too close, it's intrusive and can make us feel uncomfortable. Next time you're in a public place, observe proxemic patterns in action. If you stand too close to a stranger, you may get this reaction in the picture above. A personal proxemic pattern, 18 inches to 4 feet, reserved for friends and family, can communicate a sense of closeness and camaraderie between subjects. The personal camera proxemic resembles a medium shot or a medium close-up. Social proxemic pattern, 4 to 12 feet. The subjects in this shot are at a social distance from each other. They're sharing the space without communicating a strong sense of intimacy. A beach is a strong example of a social setting where people can easily get too close for comfort. A social camera proxemic resembles a long shot. The subjects are sharing the space but not interacting with each other. Public proxemic pattern, 12 to 25 feet, tends to be formal and detached. The subjects here have no interaction with each other. Public camera proxemic. It resembles an extreme long shot. The distance between the subject and the camera prevents the viewer from connecting closely with the subject. I'm very pleased to introduce this week's assigned film, The Graduate, directed by Mike Nichols in 1967, starring Anne Bancroft as Mrs. Robinson and Dustin Hoffman as Benjamin Braddock. This is the only film that has a single response question. There's a presentation to assist with this response in the Week 4 module. Please view it before uploading. Our question is, choose one scene in The Graduate and analyze how the mise en scène communicates an idea. Films featured in this lecture, students are encouraged to explore these films: The Royal Tenenbaums, Citizen Kane, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Color Purple, The Town, Lost in Translation, The Godfather 2, Closer, IP Man, Reservoir Dogs, Double Indemnity, The Shining, The Graduate, The Big Combo, Rosemary's Baby, We Need to Talk About Kevin, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Voltaire, The Killer Inside Me, and Minority Report. Until next time, have a great week.